Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. It would help if when we're live, I take my mic off mute. I knew I wasn't going to nail the fancy intro with the countdown and all the rest of it first time, not even second time. But anyway, here we are. We are back live with you on the Chronicles YouTube channel. And I'm delighted to be here the day after what feels like a huge victory for Mikel Arteta's Arsenal up at St. James's Park, a place where in recent times we have struggled, a place that many felt we were going to go to and drop points, a place we had to go and face not just a very, very difficult opponent, not just a very, very hostile and intimidating atmosphere, but we also had to face some pretty bad officiating as well. But that is just, as Ange Postecoglou would say, who we are, mate. Because it just feels like that is just a common theme in Arsenal games. Always sort of taking on not just the opposition, but in a lot of instances, some really poor and weak officials all at the same time. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. Why? Because we won the game. We're all feeling good. We're all feeling great. We're just a couple of points off the top of the Premier League, which is great and could prove to be very, very significant come the end of the season. Because as I keep saying, we've had this really difficult start. And not only have we had a very, very difficult start, but we've also had to navigate this start with plenty of injuries, way more injuries than you'd expect at the very beginning of a new season. We've had to navigate it while sort of embedding some new faces and new players into our team. And so, to be where we are, I think is decent. I think it's decent. I'm not going to celebrate it because, you want to be top of the pile, but I'm pleased with kind of where we are because it's about where I thought we would be. And obviously, I've got very, very high expectations this season, and I'm expecting a lot from Arsenal. And so if you meet my expectation, that's probably going to be good enough. Anyway, what we're going to do on today's pod, and if you want some kind of more sort of broader and sort of raw reaction to yesterday's game, you can go over to the channel if you're with us on YouTube, and you can find it in our match reviews playlist. We had a look back at the game last night, basically because I could not wait until today to preview it, to review it. I beg your pardon. I just couldn't do it. I was so happy. I was so pleased. I was so excited. I had so much that I wanted to get off my chest. I just felt like it was best for me to sort of do it, there and then on the spot, with the view to bringing you something a little bit more kind of topical today. And that's exactly what we are going to do. On this episode, we're going to discuss how Mikel Arteta coached Arsenal to victory at Newcastle United. Now, look, we've criticised the manager quite a bit in recent weeks, not just me, but many people, even some of his staunchest supporters have come out over the last couple of weeks and said, take the handbrake off. Well, the best news about what happened yesterday is that we don't have to have any handbrake chat for the course of this week. So we can park that for a minute. But in terms of the approach yesterday, it was different. The team selection in itself sort of gave us that indication. And I think sometimes it is as simple as making sure you find that balance between having your best defensive players on the pitch who can provide you that solid foundation. Also, though, having as many creatives and as many flair players on the pitch as you can possibly have without that balance going too far that way. Also, you don't have too many defensive-minded players because then the balance can go the other way. And I do feel like, there was probably a reluctance on Mikel Arteta's part for some of the games earlier in the season to do that because he probably feared what might happen in the event that we did try and be a little bit more gung-ho in our approach. Look, in the end, I think especially for the City game, I can completely understand it away at Anfield. But for the City game, I think it's fair to say that we probably went I'm not going to say defensive, because to say that we were defensive would be to kind of dismiss what Mikel Merino, who was one of the selections that was up for a lot of debate, or that Leandro Trossard, another player that most of you probably wouldn't have put in the team. To say it was defensive would be to dismiss what those guys bring in the final third. And I would argue that both of them bring more in the final third than they do in any other third. So, I think we've got to be kind of fair in our analysis, but it wasn't as creative as what we saw yesterday. It wasn't as free-flowing. It was just a little bit stodgy, wasn't it, at times? Clearly, Mikel Arteta doesn't see Newcastle, despite his bad record at St. James's Park of late, he doesn't see Newcastle as being at that same level as Liverpool or Manchester City. He didn't pay them anywhere near as much respect. And that was absolutely right. He was absolutely right to do that. Newcastle haven't had a great start to the season, but because of the narrative that existed pre this game, this felt like a really, really difficult fixture. And it proved to be a difficult fixture. You can't call it anything otherwise when you need till the 96th minute, essentially, to go on and win it. But I think there were three things that Mikel did yesterday. Sort of, one of them is pre-game, and two of them are in-game sort of things that I want to highlight, that I think essentially coached Arsenal to victory at Newcastle United. We started the game brilliantly. We talked about that on the main pod. We talked about how, there was a real intent in our play. Just having all those creatives on the pitch and having all that talent at the top end, it meant that there were interchanges that we haven't really seen this season. It meant that there was, a fluency about the way that we flooded forward. We had Declan Rice back at his best. The absolute athlete that is Declan Rice was able to charge forward from midfield and support in the attack and add in that extra body and extra number, but also able to get back and support and help Martin Zubimendi, who also had a really, really good game. But I keep saying it, those two are going to be key to one another. There are things that Zubimendi can do that Rice is probably not so good at. And there are things that Rice can do that Zubimendi is not so good at. And Rice's standout attribute is that athleticism and his ability to eat up the ground. So let's work our way through the three things I think were key and how Mikel Arteta coached Arsenal to victory up at St. James's Park. Okay, so the first one was a decision for me that he made pre-game, which was obviously to stick Eberechi Eze in a central position. That made the world of difference, but not just because Eze was very, very good and very, very effective. And I think when we did the Patreon pod, which is out now, by the way, breaking it down, the latest edition is available on the Chronicles of a Gooner Patreon. So go over and check that out. Patreon members will be able to access that. So go over there and have a look once you're done here. Not only did he have, I think, what do we count? 3 efforts at goal in the first sort of 25 to 30 minutes of the game. He sort of maintained this really kind of high position. And it was a position that, was one that was very, very close to Victor Gyökeres, which meant that he could kind of get in and around him if we were to go that little bit longer to Gyökeres. But that meant that Rice had to drop that little bit deeper in terms of his starting position as well. And so while I'm calling the Eze inclusion one of these kind of master strokes, I think it's also what the Eze inclusion brought in terms of the wider balance of the team. It meant that Rice had to drop a little bit deeper, which meant that Zubimendi wasn't overrun, which meant that those two were able to get a foothold and control the game pretty well. Eze being as high up the pitch as he was, and he was much higher a lot of the time than Martin Odegaard normally is in terms of starting position, because we weren't playing a 4-3-3. We weren't playing even a 4-1 sort of defensive midfielder with then 2 left eights. We weren't playing that either. We were clearly playing a 4-2-3-1. And so with Eze being that little bit higher because of that additional stability that we had in the middle of the park with Rice and Zubimendi playing together, it meant that he could then interchange with Saka a lot because they were in the same line. He could interchange with Trossard because they were in the same line. Do you understand what I'm saying? That makes the world of difference. And so, it also meant that Calafiori was a little bit less adventurous than he normally is. Timber, I don't think, is the greatest attacking fullback, but defensively, one-on-one, he's brilliant. And if he holds that position and owns that space, a lot of the time he can cope by himself. And it's about taking calculated risks at the right times. You can leave those guys in isolation at points because you trust that most of the time they'll be good enough to deal with whatever's thrown their way. So I think Eze's inclusion through the middle was massive, because not only did it mean that we had this guy in that pocket that was willing to shoot on sight, that showed some immaculate pieces of control, brilliant bits of skill to jink past people when he was being closed down, but because he was in that next line of the Arsenal attack rather than being a part of that midfield line, and it was almost like we created a line for him yesterday, he was able to interchange with people, which made us really, really difficult to predict, which made us really, really difficult to pick up, and essentially meant that Newcastle just could not keep a lid on us. Now, we were desperately, desperately unlucky not to be a goal up by the time we had a penalty awarded by the on-field referee, only to be overturned for the most ridiculous reason ever. But I just think the balance of the midfield was perfect yesterday, and Eze's inclusion obviously played a massive part in that. And I said this on the main pod, but the more I kind of watch the game back and the more I analyze it and the more I break it down, the more I think that, yeah, you know what, this was a big game for Eze, because I'd always said that I think the reluctance from Mikel Arteta to go this way earlier was that he didn't know if off the ball we were going to be the same. He didn't know if off the ball we could have and sort of maintain such a strong structure. And he knew that we needed a structure going to places like Anfield, going to places like Old Trafford, etc., etc. But what we saw was him just find that balance between having enough, I beg your pardon, going forward, but also having enough defensively. And that was key. So Eze's inclusion yesterday from the start in a central position was huge. Number 2, Mosquera being replaced by William Saliba. Now, you're probably thinking, what are you talking about? You're talking about 2 centre-halves being changed, but actually what was much better and much improved was Arsenal in the final third rather than in the defensive third. And at the time when Christian Mosquera was taken off, there was a part of me that went, that feels a bit harsh and maybe a little bit unnecessary. Like, either Saliba was fit enough to start this game or he's not. But Arteta was so desperate to win this game. He really, really wanted to win this game that even if there was a touch of risk involved, he threw William Saliba in because he felt that we were probably going to have to deal with a bit of an onslaught at certain points in the game. He probably felt like, with the fact that we were trailing at the break, and that meaning that we needed to squeeze up the pitch higher, he needed somebody that was just a little bit more dominant and a little bit more controlling those spaces. And if he reunited the pairing of Gabriel and Saliba, that meant that naturally Arsenal could squeeze just that little bit further up the pitch. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Christian Mosquera, because for me, he's been brilliant since he's arrived at Arsenal. And, he made one mistake in the first half and that was it. And, people wanted to really kind of jump on that and make a big deal out of it. I don't think it was a big deal. I still regard and rate Christian Mosquera very, very highly. But there are levels to this. William Saliba and Gabriel are the best partnership in world football for me. So to want to reunite that partnership, because it's going to allow you to squeeze up and allow you to kind of leave bigger spaces in behind, knowing that you've got the tools to cope with that. But also because I think that Saliba was going to give us just a little bit more in terms of progressing the ball into the midfield through the lines and get us on the front foot quicker. That was good from Arteta. And I'm sure, as I said on the main pod, he'd have pulled Christian Mosquera to one side, maybe not in the heat of the game, maybe the next day, whatever, and he'd have explained exactly why that change was made. So although the Sky cameras were desperate to make a massive thing out of it and claim that there's been this massive falling out and that Christian Mosquera has been hooked for a subpar performance, that I don't think was the case. This was just Mikel Arteta looking at Saliba, who is one of the best centre-halves in the world. That's why we made such a big song and dance about the news that he's agreed a new contract just last week. He recognised that bringing him on was going to aid us defensively at a time where naturally we wanted to push on and be even more aggressive than we'd been in the first half because we were losing. But also it was going to help us in terms of progressing the ball out of that back line and into the midfield. So it was a really, really good decision. And although it wasn't one that Mikel took at the top end of the pitch, it still had a massive influence, I believe. And then moving on to number 3. Martin Odegaard's introduction. Now, I know when you're chasing a goal and you've got your captain, who has been for a number of years one of Arsenal's most creative forces, when you've got him on the bench, it doesn't really feel, does it, like a sort of a genius change. It feels like the natural and the right thing to do. It's like when people used to give managers credit for bringing on a striker. They used to bring him on and say, yep, striker, go on, score a goal. Striker would score a goal, and the manager would get all the props in the world. And you'd go, well, obviously you're going to bring on a striker if you need a goal. I just think it was the way that we deployed Odegaard yesterday, because we brought Odegaard on and we sat him at the base of the midfield. We sat him in a really deep position and said to him, go and dictate the play. You set the tempo, you set the rhythm, you do that from the base. And obviously, given that we were throwing the kitchen sink at it, he was always going to get into slightly more advanced positions. But just having that fresh, sharp Martin Odegaard, and I'm not sure we would have got that for 60, 70 minutes. It was kind of right that he came on when he did. I think that just gave us an added impetus towards the end of the game, and it made a real difference. And Eddie Howe himself came out after the game and referenced that specific change. He said that when Odegaard came on, they started to take the game away from us, and he made a lot of difference, and we struggled to deal with the way that he was progressing the ball through the lines. So look, Zubimendi can do that from deep. There's no question about that. And we talked in the Patreon pod, which you can go over and check out now. It is available, about him and that brilliant dink into the penalty area for Juri and Timber. Like, he can create and he can influence, but Odegaard does it in a different way. This is bringing on someone different passing angle, left footer, all the rest of it. It was a really smart move, because a lot of other people would have probably sacrificed another attacker. A lot of others would have looked at it and gone, I can't take Zubimendi off because, we're not going to have any control at the base of the midfield. Instead, Mikel went, no, this is the way to do it. This is the way I'm going to go. And he deployed Odegaard in the right way. He played in a really interesting role, and it worked brilliantly for Arsenal in the end. So I think you got to give Mikel Arteta immense credit for the way that he coached the game yesterday. And listen, I haven't agreed with all of his decisions so far this season. I think he's got some stuff wrong, but if we're going to sit here and we're going to pull him apart each and every time we think, tactically he's not quite got it right, or he's not reacted quickly enough to something, then when he does get it right, and yesterday was as spot on a coaching performance as you can ask for, then I'm going to give him his flowers, and I'm going to go really, really damn big on that. Also, as well, I talked a lot on the main pod about outcome-based analysis, because what happens is that our outcome will dictate the way that the game is analyzed in terms of where you're starting from. Like, what's your starting position from which you're going to analyze this? And when you win, you start from a positive position, and you naturally tend to look for more positives. When you lose, you're going to focus in on the negatives. But I can promise you this, hand on heart, regardless of whether Arsenal got the winning goal or even the equalizer yesterday, okay, I would have sat here and said the exact same thing about the manager's performance. Because for me, he did all the things that we've been crying out for a number of weeks. It feels like, we've got to a point 6 games into the season, and it was always going to be the case that there was going to be a bit of a transitional period, given the volume of changes we've made and the difficulty of the fixtures that we were facing. It always felt like this could have been the case. It has been the case, but it does feel like now Mikel's just starting to get a handle on what works, who works with who, what works and complements one player versus what complements someone else, what type of game state requires Trossard, what type of game state requires Martinelli, what type of game allows you to play Eza centrally, what type of game is one for Calafiori, what type of game is one for MLS, for example. Like, I think, over time, he is going to learn, and he's going to figure out how to better manage this group. He's never had a squad this good. He's never had the depth that he has today. And all of that in attack yesterday that we were able to produce without Noni Madueke, without Kai Havertz, without Gabriel Jesus. So there's still more to come back, which sort of really shines a light and highlights what an unbelievable job sort of they've done of assembling this squad. But ultimately, the reason there are so many eyes and there's so much scrutiny on the manager this season is because now he's got to find the right solutions for the right situations and guide us to where we need to be. So, yeah, I thought his coaching performance was brilliant yesterday. I thought Arsenal were brilliant overall, and the victory was nothing more than we deserved. But the 3 key things that I thought Arteta got right, which ultimately made a massive difference in the end, were A, picking Eza in a more central position. That worked brilliantly. B, bringing on William Saliba for Christian Mosquera, even though Mosquera hadn't done an awful lot wrong. And the third was his deployment of Martin Odegaard in a slightly deeper position. So, yeah, those are my three things. That's how Mikel Arteta coached Arsenal to victory at Newcastle United. Massive thank you to every single one of you for joining us on this bonus episode of the pod. Remember, you can go out and check out the full pod. It's on the Chronicles of a Gooner YouTube channel. Go into our match reviews playlist, or it's the last live video on the channel. If you're an audio listener, whether you're on Apple or Spotify, leave us a review on whichever is your preferred platform. If you want to become a patron and support me to bring you more Arsenal content, you can click the QR code at the top of your screens. You can also click the link in the description. And if you sign up now, there is a piece of video analysis hot off the press and waiting for you. My dear patrons. Go and check it out. Thank you to everyone who's already signed up. If you're watching us on YouTube, like, subscribe, and all the rest of it. And I will see you all on the next episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner Pod. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful day. Up the Arsenal. Goodbye.